Hello, Facebook. Here I am back again for our second video for the live March series on our practice, the challenges of our practice, the challenges that everyone comes against in maintaining a regular and consistent home yoga practice. I'm going to give you all a couple of minutes to jump in live with me. I've just sent out a notification. So I'll give you a couple of minutes because I love a little bit of two-way when I'm chatting, a few comments. So, and before we get started, let me introduce myself in case we haven't met before. I'm Kate Rosette, and I'm the founder of Yoga Branches, and I'm the host of the Iyengar Home Yoga Practice Facebook group. And I'm also a certified Iyengar yoga teacher, but most importantly, I'm a yoga practitioner like you, and I have all the same challenges and struggles that you have when it comes to maintaining a consistent practice. But I'm super working at it, and so I really love to share with you tips and tricks and ideas about how to get over those little hurdles and blocks. Cool. So I can see a few people joining live already. That's great. Hopefully you can have a little bit of conversation as we get going. So last week I talked about getting on the mat. I was sharing with you my 3 M's, my three big tips on just getting on the mat consistently. And today's topic is all about staying focused. I've got you on the mat, and it's now about staying focused on the mat and not getting distracted. So before we move on, give me a little comment in the comment box there. Give me a one. I want to know what your biggest distractions are when you're on the mat. So give me a one if it's your pets. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I don't let my pets in the room when I'm practicing because they would be all over my mat. I get that. So give me a one if it's your pets that distract you the most. Give me a 2 if it's your kids. I'm just looking down because I have notes. I have lots of notes, so I don't forget to share anything with you. Give me a 2 if it's your kids, a 1 if it's pets. Give me a 3 if it's your phone. Don't be ashamed. It happens, especially if you use your phone as a timer or you don't put it on airplane mode. It can be super distracting, or if you don't turn it on silent. Give me a 3 if it's your phone, and give me a 4 if it's just your mind, just kind of going all over the place, and then all of a sudden you realize you're not on your mat and you're out hanging out the washing. I've done that before. Okay, so throw those comments in there if you're watching me live. If you're watching the replay, I love a little engagement there as well. Great to see you there with me, Genevieve. A 4, yes, the mind. That's why we're doing yoga, right? Because of our minds, and it's taking us everywhere. And so the yoga is, honing that and bringing our attention and refining it. But boy, it's a lifelong journey. So I'm expecting quite a few number 4s there. Cool. So as well as talking about the distractions, the common distractions we have in our practice, I'm going to give you some tips, some things you can actually implement to curb those distractions when you're on the mat. And the biggest thing I want to share with you today is that it's what you do before you get on the mat that's going to help you stay focused when you're on the mat. And I'm going to talk much more about that today, but that's my big tip. It's about the planning. It's about the setup. It's about everything you do beforehand so that when you get on the mat, the distractions are minimized. Okay, so let's get straight into my number 1 tip, which is all about creating a physical space and a mental space. The physical and mental space before we get on the mat. Thanks, Jessica. 2, 3, and 4. Sounds like you've got lots of distractions going on in your practice. And Marilyn has given me a 4 as well. Okay, so the first thing we're talking about is the physical and mental space that we're going to create. That's going to happen before we get on the mat. So when we're on the mat, we've got better chance of being focused. I think I'm going to start with a little story. because it was alarming to me and has kind of given me a few clues about uh, our troubles with our practice. So I was teaching a yoga retreat, and everyone, it was a very small retreat of about 10 people, and everyone on that retreat had done my 101 How to Start a Home Yoga Practice workshop, which I offer at the studio where I teach. So they were all my students, they'd done that workshop, then they'd come on this retreat with me, and we were having a discussion about their home practice and how it was going and what was working and not working. And I was astounded to learn that of all those 9 that had done the workshop, only 2 had really nailed it and got a consistent, regular daily practice happening. So we started to, nut out what was working and what had happened. And so I sort of was going through the steps that I'd asked them to set up in order to get their practice going. And that first step, well, my first step is intention, which we talked about last week's video. If you missed that, I'll post a link so that you can go back and follow it. The first step was all about your intention and why you're doing yoga in the first place. And my second step for them was setting up a physical space. And when I asked them about their space and had they actually set one up, they hadn't. The 2 who had a regular practice had, and the other 7 had not. They hadn't thought it was that important to set up a space. And it really is, because when you go to practice, if it's just there and ready and set up, all you have to do is get on the mat and start moving. And without that space there, first of all, you have to set it up, then you have to rearrange furniture, and then you have to negotiate with whoever else is in the room, what's happening. So just having a physical space set up is key. And I understand that we don't all have a luxurious room of our own, but you just need to have a little space behind the couch, in the corner, somewhere that's not a major thoroughfare that you can have as your dedicated practice space. And that's key. If you don't have it, let me know now. Give me a comment in the comment box. Yes or no, have you got a dedicated space set up? And I'm just talking about a space where you roll out your mat. I really like to roll my mat up after practice as well, because then it doesn't get so dusty and dirty, but a space that you know is yours, that's cleared, that perhaps you've got a bit of wall space to use, your props are there, it's ready to go. So give me a little comment there. Yes, I have a space. No, I don't. And if you don't, set one up immediately. The next step to having that space set up is to actually have shared that space with the people that you live with. This is going to sound a bit crazy, but you set it up and you've got your intention and you know it's there for you. But if you haven't kind of shared that with your family or your housemates, then they're not going to necessarily respect it. So I think it's really valuable to say, hey, kids, look what I created today. I set up this space and this is where I'm going to do my yoga. And when I'm in this space doing my yoga, I'd really love it if I'm not interrupted, or if you could just kind of hold your questions until I'm finished. Of course, that's going to take practice and time for them to get used to that. But I think it helps to point it out and say, this is my space and this is what I'm using it for. Especially for mums who are just, if you're practicing in your lounge room, and mums is just like around, or, dads as well, but I'm a mum, so I'm just speaking from my experience. But, when mums and dads are around in the lounge room or the home shared space, kids, it's just a free-for-all. They're expected that they can just engage with their parents at any time because that's what normally happens. So then all of a sudden you're in this corner doing your yoga and you don't want them to engage with you, but you haven't explicitly said that. I'm just really up for setting some boundaries and being really clear about our expectations and what we're hoping of other people, and sharing that with them so that it's not assumed. So much is assumed. And then we get disappointed that it hasn't happened because we actually didn't spell it out. How's that feel? Does that feel a bit uncomfortable, having to spell it out and to create those boundaries and those guidelines for your family members or your housemates? I found it really worked, especially with my kids. I've been doing yoga seriously since my son was 6 months old, and they were always coming into my space, but there was some guidelines. There was like, you're not in here when I'm doing Shavasana, Or can you just be on that mat there, not on top of me? So setting up those things from the beginning is really helpful for everyone. Okay, I'm just seeing just check a couple of comments that are coming in. Great. People do have a space set up. Good. I'm glad to hear that. And Genevieve, I'm glad to get to know that you've got one now and perhaps you didn't previously, and it makes a huge difference. Okay. So the next thing, I talked about the physical space, and now I want to talk about the mental space. Mentally preparing ourselves to practice. And I think that's sort of nice segue on from explaining to your family members that that's what you're doing in that space and sharing that idea with them. And now about mentally, how you're approaching your practice. So I have another little story. When I was in Pune, I was doing a class with Raya, which is one of the teachers there, and he was talking about, I love this story. It really resonated with me. He was talking about, sorry, I just lost my thought because these hearts and thumbs pop up over the screen when people do that, and it's distracting, but I love it because it shows that you're here with me and listening. So he was telling a story about wooing your practice, loving your practice. He actually was talking about writing a love letter to your practice. And I just love this idea and this visual, and it really resonated with me about our approach to our practice and loving our practice, opposed to this kind of attitude of whipping yourself for not doing it or saying, I have to do it or I should. As soon as we start to use those words, should and have to, whoof, I don't want to go there. It's like so unappealing, opposed to I love my practice and I want to practice. Simply implementing that in your headspace, in your mental shift, in your language will make a difference to your approach to your practice and then your focus when you're on the mat. Simply saying, I love to practice, I want to practice, is different than I have to and I should. So I'm going to even take it one step further and invite you to write a love letter to your practice. Write a little note about what you love about your practice, about why you want to spend so much time with your practice. Seriously, like you're writing a letter to your lover about how much you love them and why you want to spend the rest of your life with them. Do it to your practice. It's great. It's fun. And I think it just helps us to be clear about why we're doing it and that we do want to do it and that we love doing it, as well as writing a little love letter to your practice. I would encourage you to also treat your practice like your lover. So for example, or your partner, that when or your kids, people, the loved ones in your lives, so that when they're talking to you, you listen, right? You pay attention, maybe not all the time, you might be a little distracted, but generally when your partner's talking to you, you want to hear about their day, you want to hear what's going on for them, and you're curious and attentive to their story. So treat your practice the same. Be curious, be interested, be engaged and listening, so that when you're on the mat, you hear what the body's telling you and you're learning something about what the asanas are teaching and showing you. And then lastly, be loyal to your lover, your practice, so that when you're on the mat, your loyalty is with what's happening on the mat. You're not thinking about another lover, another thing. Stay focused and be loyal to what you're doing in that point in time. Now, that's all a little, out there, but I've got a few more tangible tips to actually, keeping that focus on the mat, a few more actionable things, like really, that you can actually do. Because it's one thing just to say easily, oh, stay focused and loyal and listen when you're on the mat. But we have a mind, a monkey mind, that sends us all over the place. So I hear you, it's not that easy. Okay, but that's my physical and mental approach. There are some things that you can do to help you get more focused on the mat. And there are things that you need to do before you get on the mat. That's what I was talking about. It's what you do before you get on the mat that's going to keep you more focused when you get on the mat. what you do beforehand. So creating a physical space, just a little recap for those, if someone's just jumped in. I notice Rick's just joined us now. So a little recap on what I've just talked about, creating a physical and mental space, and it's what we do before we get on the mat. So a physical place that you're going to practice, and then sharing that with your housemates, with your family mates, and telling them that when I'm there, this is what I'm doing, and I'd like it to be a quiet, uninterrupted space, like putting some boundaries there. And then in terms of our mental approach, love and woo your yoga practice. Write your yoga practice a love letter. Listen and be attentive to your yoga practice like you are to the loved ones in your life. And be loyal to your loved yoga practice. So next I want to move on to how we can keep our practice more engaged, more interesting, because what happens, I see, is that we kind of go into robot mentality, and we sort of just practice the things that we like and that are easy, and that we're comfortable with. And because we're creating our sequences ourselves and we are that one person, we tend to do it the same way each time, the same kind of formula. So that can become very robotic, a little monotonous, a little boring. And as a result, we don't stay interested and engaged in the practice. So I want to talk and thrash that out a little bit about how you can stay engaged in the practice, because what you're doing is interesting and different daily and weekly. I would like a little indication that you're still here with me. There's a sign up there. I can see people are watching. That tells me how many eyes are on me right now. But I'd like a little comment there. If you find that your practice does get, it not all the time, but it does fall into that slump where it's just a little boring, a little repetitive, a little same. So you can give a little yes or an emoji. I love those emojis. Those little pictures say 1,000 words. Okay, so moving on to what you can actually do to keep your practice more engaged and more interesting, so that when you're on the mat, it's more focused. So it's about mixing it up. It's about doing things differently, which is hard when you're just the one person and you only know what you know. So I'm going to give you some ideas about how you can mix it up. And the first one is about having access to different resources so that you're not relying on yourself alone to come up with the sequences every single day, because that's what's monotonous and boring, is you just doing what you know and what you're comfortable with. And there's heaps out there online. I've put heaps of material myself out there online that's available either free or for a small charge that can really mix up your practice. So I'm talking about illustrated PDFs, like pictorial sequences that you can follow along, and they're different. They're going to be a different order to what you're used to doing. They're going to set you on a different rhythm depending on how much time you've got to practice. So illustrated PDFs is a great, easy, accessible way to mix up your practice, as well as having audios. You can get audios of sequences, which is really interesting because you've got no visual, so you really, really have to listen to the instructions, to the name of the pose to know where to go next, because you don't have that visual cue. So audio-led sequences is another way to mix it up and to keep you super focused and listening. And also having access to video sequences, whether they be on YouTube or you might be part of a membership program. I have a membership program, and there's plenty of others out there where you've got a library of videos that you can access and mix it up so that you're not always doing the same comfortable poses and challenging yourself in your practice. So having access to those different things, and then each day you can pull, and then some days you're going to write your own from what you did in class or what you want to cover for your body, or then you do a PDF, and then you grab an audio, and then you do a video, and all of a sudden it's far more interesting, so that when you're on the mat, you're engaged with what you're doing rather than just kind of moving through the motions. Cool. I'm just going to check the comments there. Right. I love that comment, Marilyn, about, she said, it doesn't get boring, but it lacks the focus and intensity. So I'm going to diverge and talk about that for a moment. What I think is really important when we have a home practice is remembering that it's not going to be, sorry, I'm just adjusting my position, that remembering that it's not going to be like a class. Our home practice is never going to be as intense and focused as a class because you have a teacher who's like instructing you every second of the way through to keep your mind, especially in this Iyengar method, to keep your mind on the kneecap, on the ankle joint, on the inner heel, on the big toe. And that's where that intensity and focus comes. But I'm glad you brought that up because I've got something coming up in the next section about how you can start to get a bit more intention and focus and intensity into your practice. But absolutely, it is hard to get that on your own. Another way I was going to suggest, which leads on to that about ways of mixing up your practice, is to practice with a friend. Actually, that can be a really great way to bring that focus and intensity into your practice, especially if they're a seasoned practitioner and perhaps a little more experienced than you. Whether or not you decide to do, alternate poses and coming up, someone says one pose, someone says the next, because then you have to be on your toes thinking about, okay, what's going to work after this? Or if you're just following along with somebody else, or if you're just practicing side by side doing your own thing. But what I love about that is that you can look to what your neighbor's doing and it'll inspire maybe what you're going to do next. I'm lucky enough every Saturday morning I practice with my senior teacher because we both teach at 7 a.m. So we come at 5:30 and we practice together, just doing our own thing, but next to each other. And it's great because it gives each other ideas. And we think, oh, what are you working on there? And oh, let me try that. And so it's not necessarily intensive, but it definitely gives you ideas, that side-by-side practice. It's not ideal practicing with your BFF and you can't stop nattering about what happened last weekend. That might be not the intense focus practice you're after, but practicing with a buddy can definitely add another quality to your practice. And my last tip on keeping it interesting is about including more challenging poses into your practice. And that's going to segue into what I've got to talk to you about next. But really, including more challenging poses is going to add more intensity and more focus and shift you out of your comfort zone and get you more, like you have to concentrate more because it's not just like, oh, I can do this with my eyes shut. You're like, hang on, I don't know much about this pose. What is the position? Where do my limbs go? What are the main actions and directions of the pose? So that is another way, adding more challenging poses into your practice to keep it more focused and more intense and more interesting so that you're just naturally engaged in what you're doing. And I'm just going to check, there's one more comment there I'd like to respond to. Jessica says, not boring, but I spend too much time picking which resource to use each day. It can be overwhelming. How do I pick which one to use to vary the practice? That is like the perfect, you'd think I cued Jessica to write that. That's the perfect question for me to talk about what's next. It's true. Too much choice. We're just like, what am I going to do? Arm balances, standings, back bends, shoulders. Too much choice can be overwhelming, especially if you don't have a focus. So let's move on to what I'd like to share with you next, which is about preparing sequences and focusing your whole practice. Let me take a drink because my throat's drying out. Actually, while I'm having a drink, I'd love you to share with me. Give me an emoji. I want an emoji. I want one of those little fun faces or things to tell me. I want a happy, positive emoji if you prepare what you're going to do before you get on the mat, So do you write a sequence and plan or choose your PDF or choose your video before you get on the mat? When I say before, I'm talking about like not 5 minutes before. I'm talking about like the day before or an hour or two before. Give me a positive emoji if you do that homework, that you're prepared before you roll out the mat. Give me a sad, miserable emoji if you do not prepare before you get on the mat. If you just get on the mat and kind of hope for the best and think it's all going to work out. I'm going to give you a minute to give me that emoji. I know there's a little delay while I have a drink, and then we get on to the next section. Because next, I'm talking about preparing before you get on the mat, so that when you're on the mat, you're focused. You're not waddling about, what shall I do? Maybe this, maybe that. Basically, essentially, time wasting. Let's get the time wasting out of the way. Have a plan before we get on the mat, so that when we're on the mat, we're focused, we know where we're going, and we know what we are doing. So I'm waiting for those emojis. Just give me a yes or a no if you can't figure out how to do an emoji. Sometimes I can't find the button. I want to know, yes, I prepare before I get on the mat, like well before I get on the mat, not 2 minutes before. Or no, I never prepare and I just get on the mat and hope for the best. I'm waiting. I probably have to scroll. Oh, sorry. I have to scroll and then I actually see. Great, thank you. I've got some sad faces. That's not what I want to see, but it lets me know that I'm on the right track with what I want to share with you next. Okay, those sad faces are sad. They say I don't prepare. Okay, what you are going to do. So I just checking my notes. I don't want to forget any of this because this is like big. Okay, so much of why we're not focused on the mat is because we are bored, which I've just talked about, and we need structure and we need a plan. It's kind of like going, oh, this is a great analogy. It's going to the supermarket without a shopping list. You kind of get there and you just look around and you just start grabbing things. And at the end, you've done the job. You've got food, you're sorted, you go home, pantry's full. That's what it's like getting on the mat without a plan. You get on the mat, you've got no plan, you kind of go, I'll do Adho Mukha Svanasana, now I'll do some lunges, now I'll lie my back and do Supta Padangusthasana series, okay, I'll do some standing poses, and you just kind of fob your way through. At the end, well done. You've done your yoga practice. But it wasn't kind of like nailing hitting the nail on the head. It was just, practicing rather than being focused and intense. So let me share with you how you can get that focus and intensity and have a plan. Can you imagine having a plan for your practice for 30 days, like a plan for every single day for 30 days? That's what I did last year. Last year, I ran a 3-part live workshop on planning your practice for the whole month. It was epic. It was huge. It was really great. And I don't have the time to share all that with you now, but I am going to give you a little mini condensed version, and I'm going to give you a chance at the end of the video to grab that 3-part workshop plan series, because it literally stepped you through looking at the whole month. The first video about the whole month, and then the second video was about the weeks, and then the last video was about the days, so that you could have a plan for the whole month. And it didn't just rely on you scribbling out the same boring sequence each time, which would just be really boring doing that for 30 days. So, because I can't give you all the details of that workshop right now, I'm just going to step you through one of the really key parts of that 3-part workshop, which you can literally like get your pen and pad out right now and start writing, because this is like the moment. These are the tips you can start to implement. And if you want more, then you can grab that whole 3-part series at the end of this video. So what we're going to do is I'm going to step you through. So I want you to have pen and paper and be ready. That this is a way, what this is going to enable you to do is, 1, include more challenging poses in your practice and give you quite a structured formula. It's just one way. This is not the only way to create a sequence. It's just one great way to create a challenging sequence, so that it's including poses that are harder, and as a result, you're kind of getting this more focused, more detailed plan. So the first thing you're going to do, number 1, is write down a challenging pose that you would like to include in your practice. One that you don't ever include, or one that you rarely include. and you rarely include it because you find it really challenging and it's definitely not up there on your favorites list. So you can write that down now, or you can just take notes if you can't think of it off the top of your head. Something like meaty, a meaty one like Ekahasta Bujasana, or even Adho Mukha Vrikshasana, handstand. Something that's actually, I remember when we did the workshop, a bunch of people had chosen Virabhadrasana 3 because it's a hard one. I've been teaching that actually a lot this week at the studio. It's a challenging one, and there's lots of components that bring it together so that when you actually go to do it, you can stay up and hold the pose. So a meaty pose that you want to include in your practice that you don't ever practice or you rarely practice because you're scared of it. Let's call that pose your hero pose. Now, the next step is you're going to write down 3 poses that you think you'd like to do before the hero pose that is going to support you in getting to the hero pose. So think about 3 poses that are going to prepare you for the hero pose. So like, for example, if it was Adho Mukha Vrikshasana handstand, doing some dog poses beforehand, doing some Ekapada Adho Mukha Svanasana one-legged dog poses is going to be good preparation. And perhaps some planks or Chaturanga Dandasanas. They're kind of 3 poses that instantly come to mind for me that I know will help me prepare and do my handstand. Now, I get it. If you're sort of going, whoa, 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 slow down, I don't even know what I need to do before I get to that pose. I can't give you all the details now, but I'm just going to give you the framework. And then, as I said, if you want the full shebang to really step through every single step of the way to be able to do this process, then you can grab the full workshop. But, okay, so we've got our hero pose. Step 2, 3 poses that are going to lead to your hero pose. Now, so that you're not completely overwhelmed and just not even wanting to get on the mat because what you've just written down is too hard, include 3 poses that you love to do. I want you to write your 3 favorite poses, the ones that you probably do every single time you get on the mat. Jessica and Chin and Genevieve, everything, the ones that you get on the mat and do because you haven't planned a practice, the ones you kind of just get there and they just can happen with your eyes closed. Include them now. Write them down in your sequence because they're going to help you get to the next stages. Okay, and then write down 2 poses that you imagine you're going to love doing after your hero pose. So something like counter poses, like poses that are going to relieve the body after doing your hero pose. If your hero pose was a back bend, then after the back bend, you're probably going to want to do some twists and some gentle going forward to release the back. So think about 2 poses that you're going to want to do after your hero pose. They're going to be like little reward poses that you're doing afterwards. Lastly, throw in your inversions. Give me a headstand and shoulder stand in that sequence, and there you've got it. That's the bare bones of it. It's really simple, and if you go through those steps yourself, you will come up with a sequence that is more challenging. And then the way to order it, let me just order it for you. Do your first 3 favorite easy blindfold poses. Then add in your 3 poses that are preparing you for your hero pose. Then do your headstand. Then do your hero pose. Then do your 2 counter poses, the 2 poses that you're just going, your reward poses. And then your shoulder stand or your Setubandha Shavasana. And there you have it. Now, this is just one way to create a more challenging practice, but it is really about throwing in those more challenging asanas, the ones that you're afraid of, the ones that you're scared of, and just starting to tackle them, just starting to work with them, throw them in, do them, include them, break the ice with them, break the fear factor, and that will make your practice more challenging, more focused because you're doing things you're not used to doing because you've done your homework, you've written this out before you got on the mat, and so that when you get on the mat, the time is efficient. You know what you're doing. You're not wasting time thinking about what you're doing. The time is focused because you have a plan and you're following it through step by step. And at the end, the result is measurable. If you start to practice like this and add this kind of approach to your practice, the progress is measurable because you're challenging yourself and you're doing things outside of the box. And if you continue in this way, at the end of a month, you're going to be like, wow, you can probably actually do that hero pose that you set out to do in the first place. So that's it in a nutshell. That's my little how to get more focused and more challenged in your practice. How are we going there? Still with me? Great. I've got some people there still watching, joined in. So before I wrap up, give me a little sign. Are you going to do it? How does that approach to creating a practice sound to you? Do you think you can manage? I'm going to do a little recap. The first thing I was talking about from the very beginning was a mental and physical approach to your practice so that you have your space carved out and your mental space carved out so that when you get on your practice, it's more into your practice, it's focused. Having a physical space and a mental approach that's positive to your home practice. Secondly, I was talking about mixing it up, accessing different resources so that your practice is different and changing and not robotic and not boring. And then the third step I was talking about was creating a more challenging practice and adding more challenging poses and preparing sequences before you get on the mat so that when you're on the mat, it's more efficient, more focused, and your progress is measurable.